Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Charming a Big Bad Texan by Katie Lane. Narrated by Holly Adams. Chapter 1. Home. As far as Gretchen Flaherty was concerned, it was the best word in the dictionary. The place where one lives permanently, especially as a member of a family or household. Gretchen had never had a home. She and her mama had lived in a lot of places, but never permanently, and mama only claimed her as family when it suited her. Consequently, Gretchen had never felt like she belonged anywhere. Until now. If anyone had told her that someday she'd be living in a fairy tale castle, she would have laughed herself silly. Logical girls like Gretchen didn't dream about living in beautiful castles. They knew castles were reserved for queens and princesses. Gretchen had never been, nor would she ever be, a queen or a princess. She was just a plain old country gal who had inherited her unruly hair and freckles from her daddy, and the gift of gab and a slow metabolism from her mama. And yet, somehow she'd stumbled into a fairy tale, purely by accident, and was now living the dream. She still wasn't a queen or princess. She was a housekeeper. But she loved her cozy little room behind the kitchen, and she loved working for the 5 Kingman siblings who ran the Kingman ranch. Well, maybe not all 5. There was one who had taken a dislike to Gretchen. He was the only one standing in the way of making Kingman Ranch her permanent home. But she refused to ruin her night stressing about the big bad wolf. Tonight, she didn't want to think about anything but enjoying her bubble bath. The tub was huge and had a glassed-in shower on one side and a tall frosted window on the other. Gretchen had lit a candle, and its flickering light danced on the shiny chrome fixtures and reflected in the bubbles clustered around her. She sank deeper in the hot water and sighed with contentment. It just went to show you that one day you could be feeling lost and alone, and the next you could be living in a castle surrounded by bubbles. The water started to cool, and Gretchen used her toes to turn on the spigots. As she did, her heel accidentally bumped the handheld sprayer and knocked it into the tub. It turned on, and a spray of water shot between Gretchen's legs, hitting a spot that had her eyes widening. When she reached for the nozzle, rather than turn the sprayer off and put it back in its holder, she held it right where it was and let a fantasy take shape. The bathroom door opened and a cowboy stepped in. A broad-shouldered cowboy who wore a hat low on his forehead and a black T-shirt that molded to his mountain of muscles. He moved toward her, his dusty boots clicking on the tile floor as he grew closer and closer. He pulled off his cowboy hat, revealing the thick waves of raven black hair. Gretchen's eyes opened, and she frowned. No, not raven hair. Blonde. Ordinary blonde hair. She closed her eyes and returned to her fantasy. Tossing his hat aside, the ordinary blonde cowboy knelt next to the bathtub, his smoky gray eyes. Her eyes flashed open again. Not smoky gray eyes. Blue eyes. Plain old blue eyes. She closed her eyes and tried to concentrate. The ordinary blonde cowboy with the plain blue eyes dipped his hand beneath the bubbles, and his lips lowered to her mouth as he growled, "You want me to devour you, darling?" Gretchen was about to say yes when someone answered for her. "Devour me, Wolfe. Please devour me." Gretchen's eyes flashed open, and she sat up so quickly she sloshed water on the floor. But she didn't worry about the mess she'd made when the growling voice came through the door again. "You bet, darling. Just give me a minute." The doorknob started to turn. Quickly, Gretchen blew out the candles and ducked under the water. The sprayer was still on, but she couldn't turn it off without it coming out of the faucet and alerting the man who was walking in the door. So she held it under the water and prayed she could hold her breath long enough. After what felt like forever, she resurfaced.
"What the hell is the matter with you?"
Wolfe said. Figuring the jig was up, Gretchen opened her eyes and peeked over the edge of the tub. But Wolfe wasn't glaring at her. He stood at one of the double sinks with his hands braced on the granite counter. He hadn't turned on the light, but there was enough moonlight coming in the skylight for Gretchen to see him. He wore his standard black T-shirt that looked like it was painted to his chest and bulging biceps, and faded jeans that hugged his fine butt and long legs. To say Wolfe was handsome was like saying the Mona Lisa was a nice painting. His facial features were about as perfect as a man could get without looking too feminine. His cheekbones were high, his lips were wide and full, his lashes were long and dark. With his penetrating storm-gray eyes, continual 5 o'clock shadow, and wealth of wavy black hair, it was no wonder women threw themselves at his boots. The woman in the other room was no doubt waiting to do the same. So why was Wolfe in here talking to himself?
"You can do this."
He stared at his reflection.
"Just relax and think about the sexy, hot woman waiting naked for you."
He closed his eyes and reached for the waistband of his jeans. Gretchen's eyes widened as he flicked open the button and lowered the zipper. They widened even more when he slipped his hand inside his underwear. A zing of desire zipped through her. The reality playing out in front of her was twice as hot as the fantasy she'd just conjured up. She started to adjust the sprayer when Wolfe's hand dropped away and he hung his head.
Shit.
The door opened, and Wolfe quickly straightened and zipped up his jeans as a beautiful blonde stepped in as naked as the day she was born. Wolfe hadn't lied. The woman was the definition of hot and sexy. She had full breasts that seemed to defy gravity, and a flat stomach that probably had never seen a slice of chocolate cake in its life. The woman walked over and gave Wolfe a kiss that made Gretchen's face feel hot. As she kissed him, she slid her hand over his fly. She drew away and smiled seductively. "It feels like you could use a little warming up." She lowered to her knees. Gretchen let out a tiny gasp, then quickly covered her mouth, but it was too late. The woman and Wolfe turned to the bathtub. The woman jumped to her feet while Wolfe walked over and switched on the light. Gretchen squinted in the bright light and started to explain, but the woman spoke before she could. "So this is why you acted so strange when I wanted to come up to your room, Wolfe? You had another woman waiting for you." "Oh," Gretchen said, "I'm not one of Mr. Kingman's—" Wolfe cut her off.
"Now, Sue Ann, you know I never double dip. I didn't know she'd be here, just like I didn't know you'd follow me home from town."
The explanation and Wolfe's charming smile seemed to take all the anger right out of Sue Ann. She cuddled close to his chest. "That's all right, baby." She sent Gretchen a forced smile. "I'll just wait in the other room while you get rid of her." Gretchen figured Wolfe would take Sue Ann up on the offer, but instead he completely surprised her.
"Now, darling, that wouldn't be fair. Not when she was here first."
Sue Ann's eyes widened. "Are you saying you choose that red-headed cow over me?" Gretchen stiffened. "Red-headed cow? Now wait one—" Wolfe held up his hands.
Ladies, there's no need to fight. What do you say we call it a draw, and I don't sleep with either one of you tonight?"
"A draw?" Sue Ann released a loud, angry humph before she stormed out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. When she was gone, Wolfe slowly turned to Gretchen. The charming smile was gone, replaced with the same annoyed, confused look he always gave her, like she was a cold sore that had popped up out of nowhere and he couldn't figure out how to get rid of. Wolfe was the only Kingman who didn't like her. In fact, he'd made no bones about wanting her fired. And she couldn't blame him. The more she tried to make him like her, the more klutzy she became. She had spilled coffee, sweet tea, soup, and a variety of other liquids on him. She'd walked in on him when he was showering, lost his socks in the laundry, vacuumed up his AirPods, and even set fire to his bed. None of it had been intentional, but he didn't seem to believe that. If it were up to him, Gretchen would have been long gone by now. She didn't want to go. The Kingman Ranch was her home. "I am so sorry, sir," she said as she sunk lower in the bubbles that seemed to be popping as she spoke. "I didn't mean to mess up your evening. You see, the faucet in my bathtub sprung a leak. Your sister Adeline said I could use one of the bathrooms upstairs until the plumber can get here on Monday to fix mine. And since you were in Amarillo looking at horses, and your bathroom has this big old tub that wasn't being used, I thought you wouldn't mind if—" He cut her off.
"But I do mind, Miss Flaherty. I mind a lot. I have repeatedly asked you to stay out of my room, and repeatedly you have ignored me."
"But I'm the housekeeper, Mr. Kingman. I have to supervise the maids and make sure your room is being cleaned properly. It's my job."
"And what does walking in while I'm showering have to do with making sure my room is clean?"
Her face flushed at the memory of seeing his naked body all soaped up. "I was just putting fresh towels in your bathroom. The door wasn't locked, although there must be something wrong with the latch because I locked it tonight and you walked right in." She smiled brightly. "So I guess that makes us even." He spoke through gritted teeth.
"Not even close. I want you to stay away from me. I don't want you in my room. I don't want you in my bathroom. And I don't want you in my tub. Do I make myself clear?"
"Yes, sir." She went to do a little salute, forgetting about the spray nozzle in her hand. As soon as it was out of the tub, water shot through the air and hit Wolfe right in the face. "Oh, no!" Gretchen gasped as she tried to find the shut-off button. When she couldn't, she pulled it back under the water and sat up to turn off the taps. But it was too late. By the time she looked back, Wolfe was wet from his thick raven hair to his lizard skin boots. His jaw worked back and forth like he was a cow chewing on a nasty piece of cud. Then his gaze lowered, and his jaw stopped moving and dropped open. When Gretchen glanced down, she understood why. Her boobs were no longer covered in bubbles. They hung there like two huge water balloons. She released a little squeal before she crossed her arms over her chest and slid back in the tub, sloshing even more water onto the floor. For a long, embarrassing moment, Wolfe stood there, staring at the water with its thin layer of bubbles before he turned on a boot heel and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Once he was gone, Gretchen quickly got out of the tub and dried off with a towel. "You've done it now, Gretchen Maribel Flaherty. If this doesn't get you fired, nothing will." She pulled on her chenille robe and hurried out of the ensuite bathroom, hoping to apologize. But she was struck speechless by the sight of a shirtless Wolfe stripping off his wet jeans. Just like when she'd walked in on him taking a shower, she became paralyzed by his masculine beauty, by the artfully arranged muscles, the perfect sprinkling of dark hair, and the sexy, snarling wolf tattoo. All she could do was stand there ogling him like a Magic Mike strip show. If she'd had any dollars, it would have been raining money. Unfortunately, he didn't appreciate her appreciation. When he noticed her, he jerked his jeans back up and released a growl. "Out!" She scurried out of the room like a scared mouse and ran into Adeline coming out of her bedroom. If anyone was a princess, Adeline Kingman was. She was beautiful and kind and gracious. She never treated Gretchen like an employee. She'd always treated her like a friend. "Gretchen, what happened? Is that Wolfe I hear yelling?" Gretchen nodded. "He came home from Amarillo early and caught me taking a bubble bath in his tub. I'm so sorry, Addie. I should have used one of the guest bathrooms." Adeline waved a hand. "You didn't know he was going to come home early." She laughed, "Although you certainly know how to get under my brother's skin." Gretchen's shoulders slumped. "He hates me." "He doesn't hate you. He just isn't used to women being so klutzy around him. Everything I do for him turns out wrong." Adeline smiled. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. Wolfe has too many women wrapped around his little finger as is. But I'm sure he'll want you to fire me after this. This house is my domain. No one can tell me who to hire or fire." Adeline gave her a hug. "So stop worrying. You're not going anywhere. You're not only a wonderful housekeeper. You're my friend. And I'm thankful every day that you answered that ad." Gretchen hadn't intended to answer the online ad. She hadn't come to the Kingman ranch to be a housekeeper. She'd just wanted to see the castle her mama had talked about. When Adeline had made the wrong assumption, Gretchen had gone along with it. It was the best decision she'd ever made. "I'm thankful every day, too." She hugged Adeline tight. But despite Adeline's assurance, Gretchen knew that blood was thicker than water. If she couldn't figure out a way to get Wolfe to like her, there was a possibility she might get fired.
"Everything okay, sweetheart?"
The bedroom door opened and Adeline's husband appeared. Gage Reardon was the ranch foreman and as handsome as all the other cowboys on the ranch. "Everything is fine," Adeline said. "Gretchen and I were just having a girl moment." She sent Gage a loving look. "But now that you're awake—" Gretchen took her cue. "Good night, y'all. See you in the morning." Once downstairs, she checked to make sure all the lights were off and the doors locked before she headed to her room. On the way, she passed through the kitchen. With its 8-burner gas stove, 3 ovens, a commercial-sized refrigerator, and a marble-topped island perfect for rolling out pie crust, it was her dream kitchen. Gretchen didn't have a lot of talents. One talent she did have was making pies. But since coming to the Kingman ranch, she had to put her love of baking aside. The Kingman's cook, Potts, was an old chuck-wagon cowboy who didn't like people messing in his kitchen. She stopped by the marble island and glanced around. What would it hurt if she made one little old pie? One little old pie to win over a big, bad wolf. Chapter 2. The sun had yet to peek its head over the horizon when Wolfe woke up. Most people thought he was a bad boy who loved to carouse all night and sleep all day, and he did love to carouse at night. But he also loved the early mornings, when the hustle of a working ranch had yet to start, and the air coming in the open windows smelled of horse manure and dew-drenched grass. Wolfe had always had a sensitive sniffer. This morning, he detected another scent in the air, the scent of something good baking. And Wolfe loved food almost as much as he loved women, although recently his desire for women had dwindled. For some reason, he was having trouble getting an erection. The problem had started a few weeks earlier. He figured it had to do with boredom. He had always prided himself on living a wild, exciting life, but his wild exploits had taken on a sameness that had started to bore him to tears. Bar fights didn't get his adrenaline pumping anymore, and neither did spending time with women. The only spark of excitement he'd felt in the last month had come from an unlikely source, one he wasn't about to consider. But it had proved that things were still working, which was a relief. His stomach growled, and he rolled out of bed and got dressed. In the kitchen, he expected to see Potts making whatever smelt so damn good. But the cook was nowhere in sight. Wolfe sniffed and glanced around until he spotted a pie sitting on the counter. It was about the prettiest thing he'd ever seen in his life. The crust was a golden brown and laced in perfect overlapping strips on top of a glossy sunshine peach filling. Wolfe was ravenous and confused. Potts never made pies. He made cakes, crumbles, cobblers, and all kinds of other desserts, but never pies. At least, not since Wolfe's mother had passed away. Elizabeth Kingman had loved pie. Wolfe had been too young at her passing to remember much about his mother, but according to his brother Stetson, she could eat an entire apple pie all by herself. It turned out Wolfe had inherited the same ability. He'd only planned to eat a slice of the peach pie, but once the flaky, buttery crust and sweet, brown, sugary peaches melted on his tongue, he couldn't seem to control himself. Before he knew it, there were only a few flakes and a smear of peach filling left in the pie plate. Potts was going to kill him. Not to mention his brothers and sisters, but only if they caught him. Luckily, it was Sunday and everyone got up late. He quickly tossed the evidence in the trash and headed out the door. The sun had risen, casting the entire ranch in its warm glow. A herd of cattle in a nearby pasture lowed, while hungry horses in the stables whinnied. In the distance, an owl hooted its good night. A few seconds later, a rooster welcomed the day. The door of the bunkhouse opened, and the herding dogs Raleigh and Dex raced out to do their morning business. When they were finished, they ran over to Wolfe for a good ear scratch.
"Hey, boys. You two staying out of trouble?"
They followed him to the stable door before racing back to the bunkhouse for any bacon scraps the bunkhouse cook might slip into their food bowls. Wolfe punched in the security code on the stable door. There was a time that all you had to do to get into the stables was slide open the two wooden doors. Now the doors were steel and rumbled as they drew apart automatically. There had also been a time when the stable manager hadn't greeted you with a shotgun. Wolfe held up his hands.
"It's just me, Tab."
Tab lowered the gun.
"Sorry, Wolfe. Just being cautious. Of course, now that Jasper is dead, I guess there's no need for it."
The mention of his cousin put a damper on Wolfe's good mood. He had been trying not to think about Jasper since the fire that killed him. But every time Wolfe turned around, there was some reminder. Jasper had been Wolfe's second cousin and his friend. Even though Wolfe lived on Kingman Ranch and Jasper had lived in town, they'd had more in common than Wolfe had with his own brothers. They were the black sheep of their families, the ones who never quite met the high expectations of the Kingman name. They hadn't excelled at school or sports. They hadn't excelled at business or ranching. They'd both just been drifting through life with no purpose except having fun. Or so Wolfe had thought. But it turned out Jasper hadn't just been drifting through life with no purpose. He'd had a purpose. Getting even with his cousins for inheriting the Kingman Ranch when he thought a share of it should have been his. Wolfe had been unaware of Jasper's desire to own the ranch. He hadn't seen the troubled soul beneath the easy-going smile, or the unstable criminal who could mutilate a bull, set fire to a barn, attack Tab and Wolfe's sister-in-law Lily, and try to kill Adeline and Stetson. Just the thought of Jasper trying to kill his family made Wolfe want to hit something.
"You okay, Wolfe?"
Tab's question brought Wolfe out of his thoughts. He unclenched his fists and smiled.
"Yeah, I'm fine. You want me to saddle up a horse for you? Actually, I wanted to check on that horse I brought in last night."
Tab chuckled.
"I don't know if I'd call that animal a horse.
He reminds me of a mutt dog my daddy owned. Ugliest thing you ever did see."
Wolfe couldn't argue, especially when Tab led the horse out of a stall. The horse was a buckskin color with splotches of mottled gray on his rump. His ears were oversized and fly-bitten. His front legs had bowed tendons, and he was grossly overweight. Compared to the thoroughbred cutting and racehorses the ranch bred, the poor animal did look like a stray mutt. Stetson was going to be pissed. He had sent Wolfe to Amarillo for a new stud, and Wolfe had brought home this pathetic animal. But the horse had a sweet nature. As soon as he saw Wolfe, he came over and plopped his head on Wolfe's shoulder, almost as if he was saying thank you for being given such a nice home. Wolfe stroked the horse's neck.
"You like it here, boy? Did Tab give you enough breakfast to fill your big—"
"What the hell is that?"
Wolfe turned to see Stetson striding into the stables. Stet stared at the horse as if he was seeing things. There was nothing Wolfe loved more than surprising his big brother. He kept his arm around the horse and grinned.
"This here is Sir Galahad, but I think I'm going to call him Mutt." He winked at Tab. "Mutt's our new stud."
Stetson's eyes narrowed in anger.
"This is the stud you bought at the auction?"
Wolfe hadn't bought the horse at the auction. He'd won him from an old cowboy in a poker game. But he figured his brother didn't need to know that.
"He might not look like much, but his previous owner said he was the best cutting horse in Texas. And he's registered and has a good bloodline. If that sad excuse for an animal came from good stock, I'll eat my friggin' hat."
Stetson whipped off his hat and slapped it against his leg.
"Delaney brings home some pretty pathetic animals, but I never thought you were the type to buy with your heart instead of your head."
Wolfe gave the horse's neck a pat.
"Now, come on, Stet. You have to admit Mutt is kind of cute."
As if on cue, Mutt pulled back his lips and gave Stetson a big, toothy grin. Wolfe laughed, but Stetson only rolled his eyes.
"The price of his feed will come out of your pocket. From the looks of him, that won't be cheap."
Stetson tugged on his hat.
"And have the vet look him over to make sure the mangy thing doesn't have any parasites or diseases."
"Who has parasites and diseases?" Lily walked into the stables. Stetson's angry look immediately softened when he saw his wife. If anyone had told Wolfe months ago that a little slip of a woman would change his big brother's sour disposition, he wouldn't have believed them. But the proof was there for all to see as Stetson tucked a protective arm around Lily.
"Wolfe bought a new horse, if that's what you'd call that thing."
Lily glanced over at Mutt. Her eyes widened. "He looks, nice."
"See?"
Wolfe winked at his sister-in-law.
"Lily knows good horse flesh when she sees it. What is you two up so early?"
"I have a book signing in Houston," Lily said, "and I talked Stetson into coming with me so we can have a little mini-vacation." Lily was a best-selling author of a popular children's book series called Fairy Prairie. As the gardener's daughter, she had grown up on the ranch and had known the Kingmans for most of her life. "You're welcome to come too, Wolfe."
"Thanks for the offer, Lil," he said. "But seeing as you and Sted are still newlyweds, I think I'll pass. How long are you going to be gone?" "We'll be back on Tuesday."
Stetson sent Wolfe a warning look.
"Try to stay out of trouble."
Wolfe didn't take offense at the warning. Trouble did seem to find him when he didn't go looking for it. He shrugged.
"I'll do my best, big brother."
Once Stetson and Lily left the stables, Wolfe and Tab set up a nutrition and exercise program for Mutt. With his tendon issues, the horse couldn't be ridden for a while, so it would be impossible to prove if the old cowboy had been right. But Wolfe seriously doubted Mutt was a champion cutting horse. Still, he planned to look Sir Galahad up on the internet. Wolfe stayed to make sure Mutt was comfortable before he headed back to the house. Most people thought the Kingman Castle was an ostentatious monstrosity.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?